You know that feeling when you open your phone and see a story. People you know, somewhere together, having a good time, and you weren't invited. You close it, and then you open it again for some reason. Like looking at it a second time is going to change anything. It doesn't. You just sit there in your room and feel it. That specific feeling that doesn't really have a name. It's somewhere between sadness and anger, but it's neither of those things exactly. It's the feeling of being forgotten, of being the person nobody thought to call, of existing in people's lives just enough to follow them on Instagram, but not enough to actually be there. And the worst part is, you can't even be mad about it because nobody did anything wrong technically. Nobody owes you an invitation. But that doesn't make it hurt any less when they don't give you one. I know that feeling well because I lived in it for years. And what makes it hit harder for me, specifically, is that I wasn't always like that. There was a version of me, maybe 7 or 8 years old, who moved through the world in a completely different way. I remember begging my mom to let me invite friends over, different friends every time, not the same 2 or 3 people, because I had so many of them and I wanted to see all of them. I remember that excitement of knowing someone was coming over and we were going to play and it was going to be great. I was loud and social and I loved people genuinely, without thinking about it. And the world at that age felt full of people who were happy to see me. Because at that age it was. Nobody had decided yet who was worth including. We were all just kids who wanted someone to play with, and I always had someone. And somewhere between that kid and the teenager I became, something shifted. Nothing dramatic, nothing I can point to as the moment it changed. Just a slow process of the world teaching me that some people were going to look at me and decide without really knowing me that I wasn't worth thinking about. And being young and not knowing any better, I took that as the truth about myself instead of the truth about them. There was a friend group, and I want to be careful about how I describe them because they weren't bad people. They were okay with me. That's the most honest way I can put it. We walked home from school together because we lived in the same neighborhood. We would hang out sometimes, nothing deep, but enough that I considered them my people. And for a while, that felt like enough. But then slowly, the way these things always happen, slowly, so you almost don't notice until it's already been going on for a while, they started hanging out with other people, different people, people that weren't me. And I would hear about it, not after the fact, not in stories the next day. I would hear about it right there in front of me, while we were all together. Someone would bring up a party. Someone would talk about who was going to be there, how many girls, how good it was going to be. And I would just stand there listening, physically present, in a conversation about plans I was not part of. And nobody ever turned to me and said, "Hey, do you want to come?" It just never happened. And I never asked to come along, not once. Part of that was that I didn't want to invite myself somewhere I clearly wasn't wanted. And I still believe that actually if someone wants you there, they will tell you. But another part of it, the part I didn't want to look at too closely back then, was that I already knew the answer. I could feel it. I was the fat kid, the one people picked on, and I knew I was not the person you bring somewhere when you're trying to have a good time and look good doing it. I knew that without anyone having to say it. So I stayed quiet, I let the conversations happen around me, I nodded at the right moments, and when we went our separate ways, I went home and they went wherever they were going, and that was that. And I told myself it was fine. I told myself I didn't want to go anyway. But I wanted to go so badly it's almost embarrassing to say now. I just wanted to be included, not even at that specific party with those specific people, just included in general, just the kind of person that comes to mind when someone is making plans. That's really all it was. There is a specific kind of alone that comes from being in your room on a Friday night, knowing that other people are not in their rooms, knowing that right now things are happening somewhere that you are not, conversations are being had, memories are being made, and you are lying in your bed watching a screen. And you tell yourself that this is fine, that this is just who you are, that you prefer this, that you never wanted to go anyway. And you say it enough times that it almost starts to sound true. Almost. But then you open Instagram and there it is. Someone from school somewhere, and there are people there and everyone is laughing and it looks so easy. just being there, just being part of something, and you watch the whole thing. And then you close your phone and you stare at the ceiling, and everything you've been telling yourself just kind of falls apart quietly. And you feel the real thing underneath all of it. That feeling of being genuinely unwanted, like the world did a head count and you came up as optional. I spent a lot of nights like that, more than I want to count. And I had things to fill the time. Video games, movies, anime, things I actually genuinely loved and still love. But staying home because you love those things and staying home because you have nowhere to go are two completely different experiences, even if they look the same from the outside. And the thing about that situation is that it compounds. The more time you spend alone, the more alone you feel. And the more alone you feel, the harder it becomes to imagine being anything other than alone. You start to believe that this is just who you are, that other people have some quality you weren't built with, something that makes people want them around. And I want to be honest about something here because I think it gets lost in conversations like this. I am a social person. I genuinely love people. I light up in a real conversation. I want to be around the people I care about. And being cut off from that when it's not who you actually are is one of the most quietly painful things I can describe. Because you're not just lonely. You're lonely, and you know deep down that it doesn't have to be this way, and you can't figure out how to close the gap. And the coping made it worse because every time you told yourself you didn't want to go anyway, you were building a habit in yourself that was going to take a long time to undo. And underneath all of that was the feeling that I was wasting something I couldn't get back, that these years were passing and I was spending them in my room, and I could feel them passing and I couldn't figure out how to stop it. I felt that at 16 in a way I still don't have better words for. Just this low, constant feeling of time moving and me standing completely still. We got a little older and people started inviting me, actually inviting me. Someone would text, someone would mention it in person. Hey, we're going out tonight, do you want to come? And you would think that after everything, after all those nights alone, after all that watching from the outside, I would have said yes immediately. I didn't. I said no almost every time. And I've thought about why a lot over the years, and I think it comes down to trust. When you spend enough time not being invited, when that becomes the pattern, when your brain has filed being excluded under just how things are, an invitation stops feeling like an invitation. It starts feeling like politeness, like someone in the group felt bad and said, we should probably ask him. And everyone agreed, not because they actually wanted me there, but because it seemed like the kind thing to do. And I think part of that was probably true when we were younger. Kids that age don't really think about being polite. They just do what they want. So the fact that they weren't inviting me back then was probably genuine. They just didn't want me there. But when we got a little older and the invitations started coming, I couldn't separate the real ones from the pity ones. I couldn't tell the difference between someone actually wanting me there and someone just going through a social motion. And rather than risk showing up somewhere I wasn't really wanted and feeling that in a room full of people, I just didn't go. I stayed home where at least the alone was familiar and I was in control of it. And I said no enough times that the invitations slowed down and then stopped, because that's just how it works. You invite someone and they say no, you try again, and they say no, you do it a few more times, and eventually you stop reaching out, not out of cruelty, just out of common sense. They have their own lives and they're not going to keep reaching out to someone who keeps turning them down. And I was back to being uninvited, except this time it was different, because this time I had done it to myself and I knew it. And knowing it didn't make it easier, it actually made it harder, because I couldn't even blame them anymore. I just had to sit with the fact that when people finally reached out, I had been so worn down by everything before that I couldn't let them in. That the thing I had wanted for so long had finally shown up, and I had turned it away until it stopped coming. And while all of that was happening, everyone around me was figuring out their people, their circles, the ones they were going to carry with them. And I was on the outside of all of it, watching it happen, with no real idea how to get in. I remember that summer. I was 16, and it was one of those summers that just kind of happened around me. Days passing, weeks passing, nothing to show for any of it. And at some point, I just looked at my life and I couldn't lie to myself anymore. I was exhausted by the story I had been telling myself, and for the first time I actually sat with what was really going on. People had invited me, and I had said no every time. And I had never once picked up the phone and invited anyone myself. Not once. I had always waited for someone else to make the first move. And when they finally did, I turned them away and then wondered why nothing was changing. And realizing that was not some crushing moment of self-blame, it was actually the opposite. Because if I was the one creating the problem, then I was also the one who could do something about it. So I made a decision to stop waiting and start moving. I picked up the phone and called someone to hang out. And some of it went well and some of it didn't. Some people came up with excuses, vague ones, the kind that are technically plausible but you just know. And that stung a little. But I understood something that I hadn't really sat with before. That someone not wanting to hang out with me was just two people not being the right fit. The same way there are people I don't want to spend time with either. And that's just how people work. So I kept going, called someone else, made another plan, and when people said yes, I actually showed up instead of finding a reason not to. And things started to move. Slowly, imperfectly, with some good days and some disappointing ones mixed in, but moving, which after years of standing still, felt like something completely different. And then something started happening that I didn't expect. The more I showed up, the more I was thought of, not immediately, not in some sudden shift, but gradually in the way that real things tend to build. Someone I had spent time with would reach out again, and through them, I would meet someone else, and that someone else would turn out to be someone I actually wanted to know. And slowly, I had people around me who genuinely wanted me there, not out of habit or proximity, or because we happened to live in the same neighborhood and walk the same route home. People who reached out first, sometimes. People who, when something was happening, actually thought to include me. And I want to be honest about what that felt like after everything before it, because it was disorienting in a way I didn't expect. I had spent so long operating under the assumption that I was someone people were okay with, at best, that having people actually want me around felt unfamiliar for a while. Like I kept waiting for it to revert to what I was used to. It didn't. And the other thing I noticed was how much the people around you shape who else ends up in your life. When you find someone who is genuinely your kind of person, someone whose company you actually enjoy, you are suddenly around their people too. And their people tend to be cut from similar cloth. So one good connection becomes two, and two becomes a handful. And at some point you look up and you have something that actually resembles a group of people you chose and who chose you back. Some of those people disappointed me along the way. Some I thought would stick around and didn't. And that's just part of it. You figure out who people actually are by spending real time with them, and some of them you keep, and some of them you don't. The ones I kept are still here, and I almost didn't have any of them. If any of this sounds familiar, if you recognize yourself somewhere in what I've been talking about, I just want to say something honest rather than something that sounds good. The situation you're in is not permanent, even though it feels like it is, and the way out of it is probably not what you're waiting for. Nobody is going to show up and fix it. That's the uncomfortable part. You have to be the one who moves first, who reaches out first, who says yes when every part of you wants to say no, and stay in the familiar discomfort of being alone. And some of those yeses are going to lead nowhere. And that's fine. That's just part of sorting through people until you find the ones that actually fit. And I want to say something about age because I think people put this unnecessary expiration date on their social lives. Like, there was a window and it closed and now it's too late. It's not. The version of this that I'm describing, finding people who actually want you around, that doesn't have a deadline. It just requires you to actually participate in your own life instead of watching it from a distance. And one real person, one genuinely good friend who shows up and means it, changes everything about how your days feel. You don't need a big group. You don't need to be someone's first call for every plan. You just need a few people who are real about it, and you build from there. Filter out the ones who drain you or make you feel like an afterthought. Pay attention to who actually shows up and become someone who shows up for other people too, because that's the other side of it that nobody really talks about. Being a good friend is also something you have to learn and practice, and it took me a while to figure that out. The whole thing is slower and messier than you want it to be, and it doesn't arrive with any announcement. It just quietly becomes your life at some point, and you realize it's a lot better than it used to be.